Thank you, Grant. Thank you for me to introduce myself. So for those who don't know me, my name is Peter Stubbs. I come from a family that's lived in the Waikato region continuously since 1865. I grew up in a rural farming settlement in the Haureki district that makes Ōtorohanga look like big smoke. I went to a primary school that had 9 children in it. Most of them were my relatives. I had 44 years in Auckland at secondary school, university, and as a partner at a law firm called Simpson Grierson, and then semi-retired at the end of 2017 and moved to Cambridge 3 years ago. I've had about 30 years of governance experience, mainly in local government, and I also currently chair the Waikato District Council's Audit and Risk Committee. I just wanted to also offer some perspectives on the role of the Audit and Risk Committee as I see it. Risk management is not an end in itself. In a capitalist society, risk and reward are inextricably linked. There's no reward without risk, and the greater the rewards you seek, the greater the risk, and there are no exceptions to that rule. So in your case, if you swap out the word rewards for outcomes, you can understand how risk is an incredibly important part of councils getting stuff done. So at its best, the council is clear about the outcomes it seeks and when it wants those outcomes to be reached. And then that helps identify the risks associated with achieving those outcomes within that time frame. And then it's also important to understand the council's appetite for risks, because that can tell you whether you're going to be able to achieve the outcomes when you think you will or not. And if the risk appetites and the outcomes are not aligned, you're not going to be successful. So making sure that that alignment exists is, I think, a key role for this council. I'd also like to offer some thoughts about the foundations on which I'd like to run these meetings. I really want to encourage an atmosphere of openness. This is not about playing gotcha with staff. I want a shared understanding that mistakes will be made, and that the key is, first, to learn the lessons from the mistake, and secondly, not to make the same mistake twice. Indeed, there's a book that I've read recently called Anti-Fragile, which offers the view that in order for things to be anti-fragile, bad things need to happen. It's a really good example given of a large forest, which requires small forest fires to occur to ensure that there won't in time be a catastrophic forest fire. And so my view is that if an organization's not making mistakes, it's not pushing itself hard enough. And so I expect that mistakes will be made. The trick is how we deal with those mistakes. I'd like to think that within the organization and within this committee, we would take a trust but verify approach. The smartest chair I ever worked with was a guy called Wally Stone, who was the executive chairman of Whale Watch Kakura. Wally used to say to me, if we ask ourselves hard questions, we've got nothing to fear from anyone else. And I think if we ask ourselves hard questions of ourselves within this room, we've got nothing to fear from the wider council representatives, nothing to fear from ratepayers, nothing to fear from auditors, nothing to fear from government, because we've already asked ourselves the hard questions. I really want to encourage brevity in relation to papers. I've been pleasantly surprised, Brian, thank you, for the brevity that's been shown to this point. And I really want to encourage that, because it frankly takes a long time to be brief. Anyone can write a 60-page paper, but it takes a real skill to write a 3-page paper. And then I really want to make sure that in our papers, where there is a reference to future actions, that the outcomes are well defined, that progress waypoints are clear, and that they are trackable. So I want this to be as useful for management as it is for the committee. So the areas for focus for the committee, as I see it, are firstly, continuing to reassess key risks in what's an incredibly dynamic environment, making sure that the risk appetite, as I said before, reflects the outcomes and pace required. Making sure there's adequate resourcing and oversight to achieve the outcomes within the risk appetite. And then making sure we also keep an eye on the horizon so that we don't miss any risks coming towards us. And then finally, and this is a really important point, I'm going to try and keep these meetings as respectful and as lighthearted as possible. We can have a laugh over what is usually a fairly serious topic, and we certainly will. But I want to try and keep this as lighthearted and friendly and open as I possibly can. Right, let's get underway. We'll begin with apologies. We have apologies from Councillor Jeffries. I think everyone else is here. There are no late items. Correct. Thank you. So, Kai, if you don't mind, I find moving and seconding a pain in the ass. So I'm just going to volunteer people to move and second. If anyone's got any objections, please tell me. Cool. So we'll move apologies be received from the Mayor, seconder, Councillor Hughes. And unless anyone objects, I'll simply take it as read that we'll vote. I hope no one's going to be a stickler for detail, but
For you, Chair, can I just manage a risk here? You know you're being live streamed, eh?
I know.
Okay, cool.
Anyone who knows me knows that what I've just said is completely consistent with form.
I just wanted to make sure.
That's good. At the end of it, I'm just a simple farmer. So. Right, let's turn now. Thank you, Kai, for reminding me. Let's turn now to late items. No late items. So on that basis, we don't need to pass a resolution. Hallelujah. Declarations of conflicts of interest. Now, I've sent through to you, Kai, my list of declarations. I don't think there's anything there that should scare the horses, but what I would say is that I am the chair of the Waikato Local Authority Shared Services business. I think everyone knows that, which is called trading name of Collab. I don't think there's anything there that would create a conflict. And in addition, as I've previously said, I'm also the chair of the Waikato District Council's Risk and Insurance Committee. Okay, no other declarations of interest. Great. Let's turn now to the first item, which is a for-decision report. That is the Risk and Insurance Committee Work Plan 2023. Brian, is there anything that you want to speak to in relation to this?
No, I'll take it as read, Mr. Chair. This was put together after our earlier discussions. There were some points raised by Councillor Jeffries. Did you want to just quickly talk to that, Brenda, around the accounting policies? So.
I'll move over here since I'm presenting soon anyway. Yeah, so the point that Councillor Jeffries raised was around timing of accounting policies. It's originally in the plan, it's September, and he brought up that that's a bit too late to be doing it for the year it's been. I think when it was put in September, the theory was that was actually doing it for the following year, because Councillor Jeffries suggested doing it in June. But again, that's probably too late this financial year to be changing our accounting policies, because if I have to change our whole system to the new policies, things have already been coded the wrong way, and it's a whole heap of extra work. So I think it's more to look at in September. We're looking at the policies for the coming months, not looking historically. So that was that.
Thanks, Peter. That seems to make a logical sense. Colleagues, that's a good point, I think, from Councillor Jeffries, but I think the responses makes logical sense. Thanks, Peter. Does any of my colleagues have any questions in relation to the proposed work plan? I just had a couple of points, maybe for Graham, maybe for Tanya. The first is in relation to the NKC and Kiwi House investments. Is there any merit in having an item there on checking on material changes in those investments? Anyone have a view?
Chair, can you just clarify what you mean? Sorry.
The question would be, have there been any material changes in respect of those investments that the council, the committee needs to be aware of?
Okay, so just to clarify, so for example, the term of the NKC investment has been extended, and so has the term of the Kiwi House loan. So is that what you are meaning? Yep, okay. Yeah, so an update to the committee if there are any changes on those. Yeah.
Well, my understanding is that those are the material council investments, and that my expectation would be that maybe we hardwire it to each agenda. Symbolizing which asks the question, have there been any material changes in the period since the last meeting? Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. Yep.
Right, okay. Thank you. And then the other question, and this is a genuine question for you, Tony, because I'm not quite sure the answer. I know that there's work ongoing in relation to the previous council mark report. Is there merit in having a progress update at every committee meeting, or is that something that you think should better be handled at the full council?
Ross might have a view on this as well. I think I'm just thinking about value add, right? So I'm thinking that there is potential value in this committee having a deeper understanding of the council mark implementation plan and where we're at and the priorities than maybe the full council kind of gives us. I'm not sure. Ross might have some. We might have to go away and think about that. And yeah, I don't want to sort of either waste anyone's time or double up. So if we're having to do the same thing then with council, I would think that, you know, maybe that's not good use of this committee's time. So I'm thinking about it from a risk perspective. What would the value add be for this committee? And maybe the question is something that Ross and I go away and have a discussion on.
Just for further context, I've sometimes seen there's benefit in audit and risk committees being able to provide a level of advocacy to the wider council. If, for example, interventions might be required. In other words, you were hoping to make some progress on certain aspects, you haven't been able to make some progress. In order to make the progress at the pace that you expect, you'll need, for example, some further resource. Making sure this committee knew, understood, and agreed to that would then enable the colleagues who sit around the wider council table to be advocates for that if you need to go to the wider council. That's the only reason I'm thinking, because managing risk is not just about the negative stuff, but as I've said before, it's about in order to get stuff done, is further resource needed and can we help with that? That's the only reason. But I'm more than happy, having raised the question, for you and Ross to go and have a think about it. And if you think there's merit in adding it to the work plan, sure. And if you don't, that's cool. I thought we should at least just raise the question. Okay.
Just through the chair, could I suggest on that then that it comes to the risk and assurance and the CE alone time at the end of the council meetings that we could just update the full council at that point.
Good. Excellent. Thanks. Okay, so the recommendation is, unless anyone else has got any questions or comments, that the committee approve the proposed risk and assurance committee work plan as our work plan for the 2023 year. So that's moved by Councillor Prendergast, second by Councillor Hughes, and I think it's agreed. Right. Let's turn now to the review of the committee's terms of reference. These are, as Graham has said in his paper, really some tweaks. One of the things that I'm very mindful of is that the objectives of the committee need to reflect the work of that. Because if we're not doing stuff that's conducive to achieving the objectives, which is why I've suggested to Graham to make some tweaks. The other thing that I would say is that I'm a very big fan of the use of internal audits and having internal audit resource, simply because it's consistent with this mantra of mine that if we ask ourselves hard questions, we've got nothing to fear from anyone else. So having access to some internal resource means that the sorts of questions that might otherwise be asked by our external auditors or by ratepayers or by councillors generally are already addressed. So I know that this council, like many councils, is resource constrained, but I'm really keen to encourage the chief executive to think about how we might be able to access internal audit resource, because I think it'll add significantly to the work of the committee. So with those opening remarks, does anyone have any questions or comments in relation to the terms of reference as now proposed?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, there's just one other minor change that I didn't pick up on when I reviewed that under bullet point number 3 under membership. The committee will be appointed by resolution and should comprise of no greater, and it should read 5 members, including His Worship the Mayor and next member.
Thank you, Graham. Okay. So on that basis, with that amendment, the recommendation is that the committee adopt the revised terms of reference for the 2022-25 triennium. That will be moved by His Worship and seconded by Councillor Hughes. And I think everyone's succumbed. So that has been approved. Turning now to the debt management policy. Brendan, welcome. The recommendation here is that the debt recovery policy be adopted. Brendan, is there anything in particular that you want to draw the committee's attention to before we go to questions from colleagues?
No, nothing in particular. I'm assuming that everyone has read the policy. I suppose the one thing we have said in the policy that if there is any cases where we go with an abandoned land sale or a rating sale or something like that, we will bring a report, a confidential report back to the committee to review and provide us with that direction and say yay or nay, I guess. That'll obviously be confidential because privacy issues for the people involved. So nothing else apart from that, I guess.
Thanks, Brendan. I've got
and there is this updated version in the new format sitting on the desk for the actual adoption. The one that I used was an older template.
Thank you. Any colleague have any questions?
Yeah, through you, Chair. Brendan, I see the set off policy.
Yeah.
As far as mistaken overpayments and then set off against.
Yep.
The debt. So if there's an overpayment.
Yep.
And there's no set off applied, so for refunds, is there a set time frame for actual refunds back to the person who is owed those bonds?
In terms of how long before we won't do it, or in terms of how long before
How long
we try to
How
get
long
to
the process takes for it to be refunded? I mean, if you said you negotiate with the debtor at the time,
yeah,
then we'll offset it. But if there's no debt owed and overpayments, how long is it before that money's actually paid back to them? Is there a set time frame for that?
Right. So if the debtor has noticed and come to us and said, "Hey, look, I've actually overpaid," and we do have, aside from that, we have people who pay by direct debit, for example, their rates and actually pay more than they need to, so they end up with their credit. So sometimes they'll come to us and say, "Hey, can I get a refund?" of what is owing on my rates or what I've overpaid on my rates. When the debtor comes to us and says, hey, look, can I get a refund for this overpayment? We will process that as soon as possible and try and get into the next pay run, which is every Thursday. We do a creditors run. So long as we've got all the information we need, their bank account, all that sort of stuff, in time, we will get that processed and paid to them within a week. If we've identified it ourselves, then it's a case of we have to get in touch with the creditor or the debtor, sorry, and try and find out their details so we can pay it back to them. So that obviously depends on how long it takes to get that contact and get back from them. But yeah, we usually try and do it within a week.
Okay, so that's not because that's not written into the
Right.
policy at all. But is there a way that could be done where you can sort of guarantee a time frame or not really?
I think we've generally sort of treated it on a case by case basis.
Yeah.
Steve, like if for example, someone had inadvertently paid twice, and it was a significant amount of money, then we would action that straight away.
Yeah.
So that was refunded. But if it's someone's been had an AP and it's but believe it or not, we often have people that kind of treat us like a bank, and they want $50 here and $100 back there with their accounts, like insignificantly and credit, so we do look at each case and make sure and how it's occurred and
That's great. Thank you.
So through the chair, just another question probably along the same lines, page 20 of 78. Council does not apply any interest charges on any overdue invoices. But it's a question like why? Is that a decision that we've made? Or, I mean, you're talking about trying to recoup money, and interest is always an interesting way to get money back.
I have to confess, I had exactly the same question. My excuse is that I'm a private sector guy, so I can't understand why you wouldn't charge interest.
I guess it's not a decision that was made to not charge it. I guess the decision did was made to charge interest. Yeah, we've never charged interest on this. This is obviously talking about regular debtors, not rates, which are penalties, which are a separate discussion. Yeah, council has never made a decision to put an interest charge on for overdue amounts. So it's not that you ever or council ever decided to take it off. We just never put it on, I guess. It's not to say we can't.
So through you, Chair, let's think about this. So let's think of an example of where someone might be late in paying us. So it might be for a building consent.
Building consent's not usually because they won't get the consent. Well,
Yeah, okay.
we don't issue the consent till they
Right.
pay. So
Cool. Dog registration.
dog registrations have infringements and penalties
Yep.
on anyway.
Cool. Library overdue amounts, which are like $2
But, yeah,
or
we don't
$1 or
charge
not
that much.
cost twice as much to administer it. I'm just trying to think pragmatically around an example of when we might apply this. Not saying it's a bad idea, just saying it could add more in admin for us to do this than to just not do it.
It's a perfectly fair question.
Or
Can
it
you-
could have unintended consequences where every single person rings the mayor because they're hoha, not only with the fact that they have to pay us anything, but we're now slamming them with interest charges. So just trying to think through reputational risk as well. Not saying it's a bad idea, just trying to think it through.
Can you think of any circumstances, Brendan, where interest might be a reasonable approach to take?
I'm just trying to think of the main things that we invoice for. Property leases is obviously another, which would then depend on the wording of the lease, if we can do that as opposed to a debtor's policy. If someone can pay their lease, and then obviously with a lease, you've got other remedies that is not paid. So really it would be one-off sort of invoicing that we might do or something random.
Could I make a suggestion? Could there be a council reserves the right to charge interest on any overdue invoices? Where, I don't know,
I
some
feel much more comfortable. with that.
language like that leaves the door open for us. I mean, Ross and I are sitting here thinking environmental health, cemetery charges, like, I don't know.
I think that my sense is that that's a much smarter approach to take rather than cutting off your ability.
Yeah.
You reserve the right to to exercise the discretion at the relevant time. Okay, I think that's a really good way of resolving it. Does anyone else have any other questions? Okay.
Just, yeah, I do. Thank you through the chair. Going back to scope on page 19, we're talking about policy applies to all revenue streams, including, and then there's a whole list there, and obviously it's open to all others, but not limited to, as it says.
Yep.
Oh, and I just question down the bottom, rent payments on council-owned buildings. Is there any rent payments on council-owned buildings other than pensioner housing?
Yeah, I don't think, well, we did have the senior citizens, but that's just gone. There's definitely rent for land. I'm just trying to think of buildings.
I didn't have
Trish,
one.
Trish would be the one to ask.
Yeah.
Obviously, they're probably.
No, I just, if there was the case, I just thought there's, that would be included.
Yeah.
Leave that open.
No, if there is actually, it's a meeting.
Sorry, I missed the question.
Oh, sorry, on scope of the policy applies to all revenue streams, including them, there's a list, it says it
Yes.
doesn't say it's not limited to.
Mm.
But I just asked the question at the bottom was, is there any rent payment on council-owned buildings? It's not important, it's about council-owned buildings. But that should be in there as well.
If we take out from pensioner housing and just put rent payments.
Yeah.
And then it kind of makes it like,
Thank you.
if we haven't now and we might in the future, then it leaves that
We've
vague
got-
enough
yeah,
to,
you've
or
got
open enough.
We've got the two buildings on Porter Street. So,
Oh, yeah, but yeah.
Okay, so I just had a few questions for you, Brendan.
Yep.
The first is I note that the policy aligns with the current processes undertaken by council. It's probably the most important sentence, I think, in the entire policy, because I absolutely cannot stand the policies which set up the council to fail by building in expectations that you don't actually currently meet. So I think that's a really important confirmation. So thank you for that. The next issue was the review date.
Oh, yeah.
There's, that's currently left, I think, square bracketed fundamentally.
Yeah.
Your recommendation is that it should be reviewed 2 years after the effective date. That seems sensible to me. Colleagues comfortable with that? Okay, so let's hardwire that into the finalised version, please, Brent. And I think yep, that was what I had. Okay. So on that basis, and subject to that amendment, the resolution is proposed by Councillor Prendergast, seconded by Councillor Hughes, and accordingly is approved. Okay. We're now into the health and safety report. Are we going to be joined by the, thank you, Brendan, the people and capability administrator?
Yes, we are. We just message her.
Okay, that's fine.
Are you going to do that? Oh, thank you.
I wonder whether we move to the next item, capital projects. Aren't you? Good morning. Welcome. My name is Peter Stubbs. I'm the new chairman of the Audit and Risk Committee. Thank you very much for your health, safety and wellbeing report. Tanchi, is there anything that you wanted to add to your report before we move to questions?
No, I don't think so. It's all pretty, clear in my report. Right, good to go.
Thank you. Colleagues, anyone has any questions about the report? Yeah, through you, Chair.
Tash, hi, how are you?
I see.
Mentioned in there about the education on the lone worker devices. Has there been any issues with that? I mean, the guy's not wearing them or
Yeah,
getting them on or something. Is there a
there has been, a couple of issues. Is one that, they have found them to be quite bulky, but we are looking at solutions to fix that. They come with a carabiner so they can hook it onto their pants, and the other issue is the technology side of things. Even though they are a simple device, there is those that are digital immigrants that still struggle with that. So I'm going to arrange for the Dane to come back and go through with them. The other is like the technology side where they can actually use the device to text myself or other people as well. And that's the side we have one staff member who's like knows how to use it really well. And we also had another staff member that uses it on a regular basis, especially when she goes out, because she is on her own most of the time. She did, however, accidentally activated it. So we do know that the system works. So we did get a phone call from St. John's to say, was this an accident? Or was it just a real emergency situation? So we're able to contact her and just let her know that she activated by she got to turn it off, but she put it in her handbag. And of course, activated there. So we know that's working really well.
just another thing I saw in there about along the lines of contractor management, which is quite important, I suppose, as far as entities like this are concerned. Do we have a job hazard analysis type sort of system for both contractors and council staff?
So we do site safety audits on contractors, and obviously it's not all the time we use contractors. It'll be just a random visit. And we had an incident recently that and I mean, we weren't using the contractor, but they were working next door a couple of months ago, where a building was using a concrete saw dry, so therefore created a big dust storm which was across to the traffic intersection. And when we went to approach them to stop the operation, he was actually wearing Crocs, so open shoes pretty much. And the fact that they set up their barrier encroached it onto the disabled parking area, so therefore they could use that as well. So that's another, I suppose, a red flag for us to make sure that we do get our contractors pre-qualified, and I'm happy to assist them with that if they need it, because sometimes the paperwork can be a bit daunting as well.
Yeah, I just said, I come from an industry myself that uses job hazard analysis forms as such, and these are set up so that routine tasks are generally not included in it, but tasks that are done by either contractors or staff themselves, company staff, have a form that lists the number of hazards of the day and
Yes, that's
how,
right.
how that, so you know what I mean. So
And our staff use that as well too. When they go and do a job, they do what we call it a job safety analysis. And it's a tick. They'll go through the whole form to make sure that they've got all areas covered.
that covers contractors as well.
Or contractors, they do their own. So that's why we're kind of like, I think we're running a little bit blind in that area.
Yeah.
And it's comes down to that we hope that they have something in a system in place.
As far as risk is concerned with these jobs, I think it's quite important that those job hazard analysis or JSAs done and seen by, and to try and sort of make them so that they're easy to use, but can be checked at any time as well. So it's just and things like toolbox meetings and things like this, this to mitigate the risk to the council
Oh, for sure.
as the main contractor. If as long as these contractors have got all their ducks in a row, for better word, then but I think it has to be adhered to religiously, because there's a lot of different types out there, but if we can sort of get something that's uniform.
And I think this is what maybe sheep people is the way to go, because they've got to present all their paperwork as well with that. We had a fencing contractor that we did use, and he retired, and I was looking at sheep people, and I actually found another person, fencing contractor. And when I put them onto our facilities team, they engaged with him, and he did a JSA and sent photos, and it was a great resource. And that's what we want for all our contractors, to make sure they're actually doing what they should be doing.
Thanks. Again, great questions. Thanks. Any other?
Yes, just getting my point and through you, Chair. Just getting back to the worker alone situation again. I have just had reason to buy a PLB.
Sorry, I can't hear you very well.
I've just had reason to buy a PLB in our family, and on reading the fine print, it can actually cause birth defects.
What's that? Sorry, cause birth defects. So
A personal locator beacon.
We don't use personal
no,
location.
no, it's
So
not
it's
a
a different-
personal.
Yeah,
It's not a
different.
personal location beacon. It's a lone worker device, which is
Fine.
totally
That's
different.
fine, as long as
technology.
Yeah,
all
no,
of the
It's yeah,
right.
a satellite enabled. So personal location device are actually a one push
That's right.
device.
That's
This
right.
is not a one push
No,
device.
okay, that's fine. Now, for your worker alone, if for any reason they were not in a position to enact that device, how is there a check, or is there a check on if they didn't return? So like, for example, the people on your water schemes, etc., that are working in quite isolated areas,
Yes.
if
So-
they didn't return, is there anybody who would know? Is
Yes, so they are supposed to check it with the managers as well.
Now,
And the other thing is we do have E-road, and with the device, I can actually locate where they are as well too. If they're on E-road, if they've not in their vehicle, so we can narrow it right down, pinpoint to where they are, location.
right. Now, this is a issue that's come up for us on our farm. And it's a really hard one, is that we've got a contract offer on this next season, and they had every intention of having their children with them on the farm.
Children,
Yes.
right?
So is there any contract of yours that might take their children at the weekend? It's lovely thing to do. I'm not suggesting it's not, but after quite a bit of legal advice and from several different sources, even though we personally are no longer going to be employing on the farm, we can't exempt ourselves from responsibility in that case.
Right.
So would you have any situation where any person that is either contracted to you or part of your council employee would take children alone, but let children with them at the weekend?
I'm not aware of any situations like that has happened, but I would like to think that they wouldn't be, if we'd engage in a contract, it would be more like an emergency situation. Otherwise it would have to, it'll be done Monday to Friday. So, I think given the situation, if it's an emergency, I would like to think they would be taking their children on board for any exercise.
Okay, thank you.
You wish any questions? Actually, I've just got a few questions. Thanks for your report. Um, this issue of pre-qualification, do you regard it as pretty important?
I think, yes, definitely,
Right.
very important.
So you said you're developing a plan to mitigate the risk. That plan's not attached, but that's fine. Is the plan time bound? Have you started rolling it out? Can you talk a little bit about?
Yeah, so the plan is probably to generate all our contractors and actually go through the contractors list. And there's some that we already know that are already pre-qual. And then those that aren't on the list, we would look to approach them and look at them and explain to them why we need them pre-qual. And the benefits of being pre-qual as well too. So and we have to give them the opportunity to apply for this.
Okay, no, that's really helpful. I wonder, right, whether it might be useful. We have an update from the country, which is progress of the plan in relation to pre-qual, because it's really locked in for the next week.
Through you, Chair, can I please speak to this? I think that it would be helpful if the committee understands the range of contractors that we use. So we have some contractors delivering multi-million-dollar roading programs. And Mark can probably speak to the level of health and safety, what they have to produce, what the guys need to sign off, how it's included in tender documents, etc. I don't want the committee to get a feeling that we're not doing any of this for anyone. Then we have someone who cleans the Waipapa toilet, and they are a contractor. A single person, family out there probably. So I think there's a size and scale thing here that we maybe need to understand in terms of what we're actually doing for the various people, because as Tancha said, some of them are so small, they need our help to actually get them across the line, whereas others are Inframax and they obviously have people employed that only do that job. So I guess I just want to make sure that where the risk might be, and I know there's risk right across this area around contractors, but making sure we're kind of identifying what we're clear on what we're actually talking about.
I see this report as being very much getting a sense that we are progressing through pre-qualifying as many of the contractors as possible. And that's a check-in that we're doing at every meeting. We've been told it's important, intuitively it seems to be very important. This is not about asking how Tancha is going to do that, and nor do we need to necessarily understand the difference in scale between a very large contractor and a very small contractor. This is about making sure that we're making progress in accordance with Tancha's own plan in terms of getting as many of the contractors pre-qualified as possible.
If I may add to through you, the chair. So pre-qual, the sheet pre-qual's been around for a number of years now. We've been using it for at least 6 years. So I'd say it's more about maybe a check on where we are rather than development of this pre-qual. So every tender we put out, every contract has pre-qualification through sheet as part of that. So I think probably just to highlight that this is probably not starting. This is something that's been in place for a very long time. It's probably just maybe a milestone
Reviewing
on and reviewing those smaller contractors, because that's invariably where our difficulties lie. It's with the smaller contractors. If that helps at all.
Thank you. I've got no sense that we are at a starting point. I've got every sense that we are in progress, because that's what Tancha's agency is. It's very much about making sure that we are making the progress that Tancha is hoping to make, and taking this priority issue and just doing a check at every meeting. That's all we're doing about. Makes sense to you?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. The next thing I wanted to ask you about, Tansha, was in relation to, whether the organisation has health and safety targets in terms of, lead and lag indicators. We get a sense,
No,
okay,
No, we don't.
I think that's something that's fairly important. This is not a criticism, because the reality is every organisation, no matter what aspect of the organisation you look at, is on a journey. I think we all agree that every single employee has the right to expect that they will come home from work at the end of the day alive and uninjured. And so certainly with other organisations I'm associated with, there are lead and lag indicators that set up targets that are set up for health and safety that we can monitor on a regular basis. Do you know Lynn Shirley at Waikato District?
I don't think so.
She is the zero harm person at Waikato District, and she's fabulous. If it would be helpful, Tanya, I'm more than happy to put Tanya in touch with Lynn, because I think Waikato has got a well-developed zero harm series of indicators that might be useful and might be relevant to you.
Fantastic.
To
Yes.
capture. So I'll follow up with Lynn on that. And then the other thing that I'm really keen to see, not just in your report, but in reports generally. There's always lots of data points, but what I'm most interested in is trends. So, and this is not intended to be critical, but what I'd love to get from you at every time we meet is a sense from you as to how things are trending in relation to these health and safety areas. Are the areas that are concerning you because they're going up? Are the areas that are where you feel that you're making great progress? And if so, why? So what would be really useful for me, hopefully my colleagues as well, is that as you start to develop these goals, hopefully with Lynn's support, that you're able to include in the report your own sense of the trends based on data in terms of each of the areas that are tested on the safety. Does that make sense?
Yes. Yeah, sure.
Great, excellent. Okay. Does anyone else have any questions or comments? Okay, Tansha, thank you so much for your report. Look forward to talking to you again at the next meeting.
Lovely. Thank you very much.
So the resolution to accept the report is, thanks, Tansha, is moved by His Worship and seconded by Councillor Brendan. Okay, I think we'll take a 5-minute break at 11 o'clock. So that means that we might have to bifurcate the next item, but that's fine. So the next item is capital projects report. Welcome, Mark.
Good morning.
Not the best of summer seasons. For the group manager of engineering and assets.
No, I even walked in here and had to put a jacket on. So cold.
Mark, thanks very much for your report. Is there anything that you'd like to add to the report? Any verbal update you want to give before we crack into questions and comments?
Yeah, I think probably the most biggest change we've seen is probably the announcement last Thursday around Three Waters and what that might mean to us having to maintain a water services delivery for effectively another 3 years. So obviously my report was written prior to that announcement. So we're still very much digesting what that means to us going forward. So that's probably the only thing I would highlight is what we had been planning for to transition in July. 2024 is now effectively between 2025 and July 2026, which is quite a lot of planning for us now to sort of unfold what that looks like going forward.
Let alone whether it's 10 regions or whether it's going it alone, possible joint ventures with other councils.
There's lots of unanswered. I suppose the reform throughout has been always unanswered questions, and we're no further along that spectrum at this time. So that's probably the only thing I think that's a big change from when I wrote my report to now. So I think, I'm probably better suited to maybe answer some questions.
That's fine.
Take it as read.
Thank you, Mark. Colleagues, any questions?
Actually, just one question through you, Mr. Chair. If you go significantly over time on a project for all the right reasons, is there ever a question about where the funding comes from and whether it will actually still be available to you in the next financial year?
So if we're, I suppose, for example, if we were trying to deliver a water reservoir project, which we were expecting to finish by the 30th of June, and we couldn't, or it was going to creep into the next financial year, we would then put forward a report to carry that funding over, generally those capital projects are loan funded anyway, so it's just a matter of the accountants figuring that out for me, but we just carry it over to completion.
Thank you. Just to follow up on that, so, and councillors Hughes and Prendergast might have said this, so we bring a carried forwards report in its entirety, so you don't get drip fed Mark's project here, Graham's project here, someone else's project here. You will get one report that has all the carry forwards that staff are proposing will come to council all in one hit, so you get to see the whole lot. And what we've talked about before is managing the capital works program as a 3-year program. So of course that's all well and fine, but we're about to head into year 3, no pressure or anything, Mark, but we are going to have to get really, really good and really clear from the 1st of July pretty much next year around giving you predicted, this is how we think we're going to look at the end of next year. So there's no surprises. So we don't get to March 2024 and say, oh, sorry, we thought we were going to deliver 15 projects, we're only going to finish 5. So while, years 1 and 2, we've had the kind of luxury of being able to move them along. We know all the challenges. We've had, I think what I've said to the team and what I said to council last time is we are going to have to get finance and assets together to really nail, so that governance understands and this committee understands the risks we might face or not around that end of LTP result.
When do you expect to bring that carry forward report to the council?
Historically, it's usually been in September, depending how our annual report process goes, at the end of June. If it's not August, it'll be September, but September at the latest.
September, in terms of likely carry forwards for the future financial year.
From this year to next year, we do it, September.
So for the year beginning the 1st of July, ending the 30th of June the following year, you expect to tell the council in September of that financial year what carry forwards there are likely to be beyond the financial year.
No.
Yeah, it's for the one that we're already 3 months into.
No, 3 months left. Got financial year in the June.
But we bring the
Oh,
report
sorry.
in
So
August, September.
So the June 2023 in balance date coming up, the report on what we're carrying over from this current year that we're now sitting in to next year comes in September.
Of 2023.
Yes.
Retrospective as opposed to.
Yeah.
that useful? With respect.
Well, from our point of view, from finance to carry the budgets and everything over, yes.
When you want to know before the start of the new year. I mean, wouldn't you know? Isn't that what forecasting is for?
Yeah, but I guess that's the issue that Tanya talked about, was our forecasting is not been the greatest historically.
Okay.
Yeah, so just a bit, a bit more clarity, we're only talking about carrying forward capital.
Yes.
projects, so we're not carrying forward operating projects, so all of our capital projects are either funded by internal debt or they're funded through depreciation reserves, so where we end the financial year, those carryovers don't impact on the financials at the end of that year.
Impact on the following year. But I hear what you're asking, and I've always wondered that myself. How useful is this for a governance body to be approving in September? Basically, we've already started the work from the 1st of July. If you say no, Mark's going to say, well, sorry, I'm just awarded the tender. So I think, Ross has just kind of said something which I think might be useful around, it's more of a financial budgeting type thing rather than a planning tool. And I think maybe as a leadership team, we need to talk about, there might need to be 2 reports to council. One that signals the work that still is needing to happen, and second, the budgeting one that is the carry forwards piece of the, I don't know. But I hear what you're asking, Peter, and the concerns you're raising.
There's no doubt that this council is not unique in struggling to deliver on capital projects. It's endemic across the sector for a whole range of reasons. Labour constraints, consenting, the time it takes just to get projects from council approved to shovel ready. I realise that's difficult, and Mark, I'm surprised you've got as much here as you do, given the number of projects that you've got to manage. I guess though that simply because it's hard doesn't prevent the need for a more integrated approach between finance and the delivery team to make sure that there's a good understanding about the progress against the expectation of delivery. And it seems to me, again, thinking of the opportunity for this committee to be advocates for management at the wider council table. Much better, I think, and this is Tanya for you to consider, much better, I think, for this committee to have a regular update on progress in terms of capital project delivery, so that where there are issues, those are socialised in a smaller group. Secondly, where there is a degree of intervention or advocacy required, there's the opportunity to turn colleagues into advocates around the council table, rather than bringing stuff cold to the council table. Because you've got to think that if there are blips in terms of project delivery, that would necessarily conceptually create potential for cash flow implications. And making sure that the project team and the finance team are fully integrated seems to be a real challenge. I'd be really keen to have a conversation with you, perhaps offline, as to whether there's a way in which we can improve the reporting on progress to expectation at each meeting, Mark, so that from my perspective, what you're doing is less relevant to me than whether you are tracking against where you hoped to be. And if you are not, what implications that has for Brendan's need to come up with cash. Those are the risks that I'm really interested in understanding. I totally understand that there are a whole heap of other risks associated with actually engineering construction, which I assume that you do it from a conceptual perspective, delivery projects and making sure we understand that the cash flow implications, particularly if they, it's probably a place to start. But I welcome your comments. You have already given some comments.
Yeah, I agree. And this is something that, that Tanya and I have been working towards. And I think we've, definitely got the roading side of things probably forecasting a lot better. And that's because of the external funder, obviously. But Brendan and I have been working on a similar program for Three Waters and community facilities. The other point I'd like to make is we've now actually just his first day today, I probably should have brought him down to me as the dedicated manager of the projects team, which my goal is for him to actually take over the reporting of the capital projects, because he'll be one step closer to it and working closely with finance around forecasting those, as where I've been sort of wearing that hat to a certain degree with consultants for probably the last 12, 18 months. So I think we're on this journey to getting better, and I really appreciate that feedback, Peter. And that's, I think, to give you some assurance, I think we're heading in that right direction. Yeah, and just one other comment. I do report those capital projects to council on a regular basis, and I think that in itself is probably flagging some potential carryovers, which will probably be brought up before June. So rather than us coming in and cold and saying, "Oh, surprise, sorry, I've got these 20 projects I'm going to carry over." So in the September is almost retrospective of those earlier conversations, but I'll definitely take all that feedback on. Thank you.
Colleagues, any comments or questions?
Yeah, just to support Mark on that last part, Peter, we do get regular updates in terms of where projects are at, in terms of the tender stage and when actions are taking place and so on. So we have a bit of an idea prior to that notification in September. A couple of questions, Mark, is on 4.11, 4.12, and I suppose first one was around Ōtorohanga Road, which is probably more certainly in Kathy's territory. In light of the likes of Cyclone Gabrielle that's come through and the prioritisation of work projects, I just wonder if there needs to be, and it's probably really brought it home to everybody in New Zealand, how vulnerable our roading network is, and whether we should be more focused on resilience as opposed to really nice to have projects. That's just my first take on that, and also in light in terms of where those tenders are indicated to come back, which is significantly more than what was originally forecast. So I'm just raising that one there. The other one with 4.12 is the Lawton Drive footpath project. How did it get to the stage where it did that? Majority vote was cast by those members present not to support the project.
Yeah, it's a good question. So we obviously took that as a annual plan project. I think it was put in last annual plan. So we did the early design, and then we put it back out to the Ratepayers Association to sort of, I suppose, seek feedback on what that design looks like. And the letter I received back from the Ratepayers Association is that there were majority not in favour of carrying out that project. So plenty of other projects to carry on with rather than pushing one through that no one seemed to be in favour of. So we just took it off the. I don't know if that answers the question. Yeah.
Through you, Chair, I think when that project was put through the annual plan and through the long-term plan, I mean, probably we maybe assumed that there'd been some kind of community discussion around it and that it had come through, you know, that sort of channel. And so we progressed with it. And yeah, fortunately, Mark's intuition was right in that he sent those plans back to the ratepayers group to ask them. So thank goodness for that, or we would have had the people out on site and probably had a community uproar.
Look, we've said before, and that's probably where your intuition is kicked in, Mark, where something is planned, then you realise the community is not in support of it. especially in such an, yeah, in the community as we're talking about.
Let's, why don't we do this? Let's take a 5-minute break to allow toilet stop, cup of tea. Mark, you wouldn't remind, if you wouldn't mind staying in a chair there, and then we'll reconvene, in case, my colleagues have any other questions. Great. Thank you. People have complained I've never needed a microphone before, so I'm struggling to get used to it. Colleagues, any questions or comments for Mark?
Yeah, through your chair. But Mark, the Kawhia water treatment plant, I see it's complete. I like the way you've done your colour coded, completed and cancelled and tendered keys, but are you happy with the way that's come out? I mean, you haven't had too many other problems, or do you don't see any other issues coming up with that plant at any stage? You know, there's probably been a glitch or two in the past, isn't there? So pretty confident that it's gonna go the distance.
Yeah, we're very happy with how that filters. When I say, yeah, as far as upgrades, we've just replaced the clarifier and the sand filter with a new filter. So we adopted some new technology there, which was, you know, I suppose a risk in itself is going outside the norm, but the way it's working currently, it's working exceptionally well, and I think that on top of the water loss work we've been doing out there with the water meters, we had a really good Christmas, and I think if it wasn't for a simple mail function outlet through the Christmas period, we would have got through tremendously well. But unfortunately, we had an unrelated plant problem and put us under a bit of stress for a couple of days. But as far as how that plant operating now, I'm very pleased with it.
Oh, it's great. So really the only risk out there as far as water supply is concerned is basically dry summers and overpopulation during the summer, as we've had in the past, I suppose, that will sort of manage to address that with capacity.
Yeah, I think the water loss work we did, which was through the water meters and the new filter, if it wasn't for that malfunction we had on the backwash system, I think we would have gone through quite peacefully. Actually, I think it's a real shame that happened, because I really wanted to have that ability to say, yeah, we've really nailed this. But we recovered really quickly once we got through that issue. So really confident going into the future Christmases that we won't have those water restriction issues that we've had in the past, especially 2 years ago. What was running.
Oh, that's awesome. Thanks, mate. Cheers.
Any other questions? No. Okay, so we will resolve to receive the report. Mark, thank you very much. Look forward to your thinking on how we report in the future. That's been a really good conversation. So the reports received, moved by His Worship and seconded by Councillor Hughes. Kaya, I'm used to a situation where at the start of a meeting where there are information only reports, we pass one resolution to basically receive all of the reports, and where there are reports for approval, those are individually voted on. But if you could have in consideration, give some consideration to doing that, it would mean we'd have less resolutions. We could just pass one to receive all of the reports at the start of the meeting. Great. Okay. Thanks, Mark. Welcome, Brendan. We're now on to the veritable route march that is the annual report, management letter reports.
Thank you. I will take the report as read, I guess, and just open up for questions. Probably not much to say.
Can I take it, Brendan, that you and your team agree with all of the recommendations from the auditors?
We accept them. Some of the ones, particularly some of the around the sensitive expenditure in terms of where like these are credit cards, some of those ones I don't know if we necessarily agree with. For example, there was the gifts that were bought for everyone on the credit card, which included the CE. And so therefore we had no one that could actually sign it off. And except for Max can do it manually, but we don't have electronic access for him to do it. So we accept them, but yeah, not exactly has to.
So, this may be a radical departure from the previous chair, who I respect and has had tremendous experience in the audit frame.
Mhm.
I've never been concerned about management teams that take a different view to the auditors and argue their case. So, I guess it's really important to me that if we're going to embark on putting in place recommendations from the auditors, it's because you genuinely think it's a good idea.
Yeah.
If you genuinely don't, then I'm, and I think my colleagues would be more than open to counter arguments from management that says we hear them, but we just don't agree, and here's why. So I just wanted to make that. The second point I wanted to make in the context of sensitive expenditure is that it seemed to me, out of respect for Deloitte, that the policy was too tight. And
Yes.
I wondered whether you might like to give some thought as to whether the way to deal with this issue was to amend the policy.
Yeah, so the policy is actually up for review. It was actually up for review in December last year. And just timing wise, in terms of resourcing, I haven't got to that yet because the debt policy, since we didn't have anything, I thought it was more a pressing priority than the update of the sensitive expenditure. My plan is to get that updated for the June meeting, and those allowances will be expanded, I guess, is possible for it.
Can I give you some, might I suggest that one of the things you might consider is, rather than tie yourself to numbers, which are necessarily against inflation, there's some other way to do it.
Yep.
I know the term policy bonfire is a well-liked term by central government at the moment. But I think it applies equally to local government. I sometimes worry that councils get in their own way when it comes to getting stuff done, simply because they've got policies that are way too tight. And as a result, that constrains your ability to achieve outcomes within the time frame that the council is believes appropriate. So I just wanted to signal to you that if you're going to do policy reviews, I'm not someone who thinks tighter is better. I think at the end of the day, council should trust and see you to do the right thing. And fundamentally, if there is discretion built in, that's fine with me. The key thing is, as I said before, if you've got a policy, honour it. And if there's something wrong with the policy that makes life hard, and there's a good reason to change it, let's change it.
Yep.
So through the chair, Peter, question back to you then, Peter. So if you weren't putting, if we're talking about sensitive expenditure here, if you weren't putting a fixed figure on there, how would you word that or engage your way on that?
Reasonable, through you, Chair.
So that is that the trust in the CE that she needs to.
Yeah, through you. In my experience, fraud doesn't happen with somebody purchasing a $60 meal instead of a $40 meal. You know, and I think as leadership team and managers, it's on us to be checking. I know that, you know, Graham and I have had conversations when we've signed off people's expense claims. You know, I certainly don't just put my signature on the bottom. I just have a quick flick through, might not be everything, but, you know, just to reassure myself. And yeah, we've had the odd discussion around what people are claiming and that. So, yeah, I think we're making a rod for our own back there. We took the same approach with our delegations policy last time. Ross and a bunch of other people worked quite a bit on that to try and, you know, free up our people so they could go and do their work rather than have things be signed off by 3 people every time.
Yes, at some point, you've got to trust the people that work for you. And if you don't, you have to get rid of them. Trust is absolutely fundamental. So I think that, as I said before, council's got to think really hard about making sure that that it's getting in its own way. That's not suggesting that it is loose with ratepayers' money, far from it, but fundamentally, trust and empowerment will achieve better things, I think. The next question I had, Brendan, was in relation to the impairment review, which is pretty important.
Yep.
What's your timeline for carrying out impairment reviews?
So I guess historically, we've sort of done them in that June, July period.
Ready for
as-
an August kickoff, ready for an August kickoff for the auditors.
Yeah, usually here in September.
Okay.
So, yeah, we have that extra time. But obviously, if we know June, July, we need to write off. Historically, I don't think we've, as long as I can recall, we might have had one item be impaired over the last 15, 16 years, which was a pump that stopped working around the 30th of June. So yeah, so we don't usually have too many issues from the point of view. But yeah, it's sort of historically been an informal process, so it's sort of been me talking to the Mark's equivalent or Mark at that time, at this time, and those under him, because that's where the majority of the assets that are likely to be impaired be. As to what they've got, I guess it's just documenting it in a more formal way.
Yeah.
Than we've historically done.
And I guess the flip side of that from memory is valuations.
Yeah.
In terms of materiality, is that a 10% window? Is that correct?
Yeah, the 10% is what we use. Yeah, that was based on discussions with Deloitte. We did our fair value assessments a few years ago. So with regards to valuations, we're in the process of trying to see if we can get Beco did our valuations last year to give us a fair value market assessment. While we can do that in-house as we have historically, the issue we have is that the March indicators aren't likely to be out until mid to late May. And that creates a bit of a time crunch trying to get those indicators in, see what the inflation is looking like, do the calculations, then decide, yes, we need a revaluation done.
Yeah.
And let's get engaged Beco and something into July before that all starts. So we're trying to get them enough email and just have I'm going to chase up the guy this week. See if they can do that for us. Because they may have access to better, more frequent indicators, plus they work for other clients, they'll have that sort of information, so they might have some information that we can probably have access to.
This is important, is it? Because revaluations and impairment issues are often major issues from an audit timing perspective.
Yes, yes.
So making sure that those issues are dealt with early.
Yeah.
Is absolutely critical to the time.
Yes, absolutely.
Just if I can just add as well, Mr. Chair, you know, while we have traditionally been on a 3-yearly valuation cycle, there's been more and more pressure now with significant movement in asset values to value every year. We have had discussions with CoLab around a shared service around rating valuations.
Yeah, so that there was the CoLab has been doing some work around that in terms of a sort of standardized because all the councils the Waikato use RAM for their roading asset management. RAM has a valuation module that will do that. It's more around figuring out a standardized sort of useful lives and cost per unit, cost for all the different assets we have, and probably adjusting that depending on local factors. Obviously, building a road in Hauraki compared to building a road here, sort of times can have some slight differences. So they're doing a whole heap of work on that at the moment. They're trying to get, I think November, December this year, they're trying to get a first go of that ready for councils to start having a look at. So we had a meeting 3 weeks ago, I think it was, in Cambridge with the councils going through, because we'll do the same thing. We're trying to get that standardized approach. The hope there is that by getting that standardized approach and processes all documented, we can get sign off from the auditors. That means we wouldn't necessarily have to go to an independent reviewer, because so long as we have the legislation basically says standards say we still have robust processes, well documented, then we can actually do it without having a better review, which obviously is significant improvements on our timeframes.
Thanks, Brendan. Thanks, Graham. Colleagues, any other questions in relation to these notes?
Through you, Mr. Chair, it's really a question for both Brendan and Tanya. Just reading through the entire report, I guess my first question was, is this what we would expect on a year-to-year basis, all the points that were raised? And secondly, once you have worked through all the points, a lot of it appears to me that it will become business as usual, and this is just what happened, that there has been a significant effect, carry on effect with COVID. But are you sufficiently resourced, is where I was going to, is there going to be a significant extra workload, or is it going to just become business as usual once you've worked through it?
For most of them, I wouldn't say there's significant additional workload. There might be a little bit of increased workload. We have resolved that because we just finished the review of the finance department. We now have an additional resource we've added, which started 3-4 weeks ago. So we're in the process now of reallocating those tasks around everyone, making sure that's obviously freeing up Graham a bit as well, as part of the issue historically has been the smaller team we had. I've been involved with a lot of the changes and stuff, which means I can't do the executive reports. So now I'm stepping forward away from that, so I can do the reviewing side of things. Because Graham doesn't have to review stuff as well. So it's creating, having that extra one person has definitely created the space to address most of these. Yeah, not a significant additional workload. The asset side of things, which is the one that's agreed at the moment, that's probably where the most work comes from. And I'm saying a huge additional amount of work. It's just the timing that will change. Historically, a lot of our asset additional stuff has been done after year end. With once the process is in place, that we're working through the assets team to get in place, be able to do that during the year. So it'll switch timing of the work throughout the year, which means obviously the reporting of the year and the financial information will be more up to date as well.
Thank you. Councillor, just from my perspective, seeing that you asked both of us, and we have, kind of different roles in the organisation, I always get concerned when I receive the audit management report and better, and it's full of, things we need to do. I never know whether I should be alarmed and having sleepless nights, and I've talked to Graham and Brendan about this, or whether it's kind of like, these are tiny. So usually I ring the auditor and I say, hey, just you tell me, like, kind of how am I supposed to feel about this? Because there's a lot in this list and I'm not sure how big and how small is this, just part of being a small council or what. And he's like, the last time I talked to Matt, he just said to me, look, I would be on the phone to you straight away if I thought that your organisation was, a court case. Yes, there are some things on here that we would like you to progress. But he said a lot of them are raised, because it would be, they wouldn't be doing their job if they hadn't raised them. So yeah, so I just kind of always try and get a sense from their perspective and have a discussion there, as well as talking to Graham and Brendan about it, too. So.
Sounds very sensible.
Through you, Chair. Tanya, you said that you rang them, and he alleviated your concerns a little. When you first got that report, was there anything that jumped out at you that really concerned you, or you took it as a whole? Okay, this is not so bad. We can work through this sort of thing.
Yeah, and just the I guess getting some things across the line and making sure we've got some timeframes around some things as well, I think is pretty important. Otherwise, a year goes by, it's pretty crushing when they end up on the following year's report. And and then there's some things that you sort of look at and you think, oh, how could we have done that differently? Minor in the scheme of things, but you can see how it raised alarm bells, for the audit team.
Yeah, you sort of, I guess, having been through, I don't know, probably 40 audits, they use a system of sampling, so, they're not gonna pull out every invoice and you can guarantee 9 times out of 10, you would have done something this way for the whole year. And then the one year that they'll pull out wasn't authorized or wasn't checked, or someone's gone over the $30 limit for a meal, or, and so it's always the way.
Yeah. Thank you. Brendan, just a couple more follow-up questions. In terms of these 22 items, how many do you expect to land in time for the next audit?
So as I said, I think 12 of them were in the green, which means I'm pretty confident that we've completed it already.
Yeah.
Or in the case of, say, that peer review will be completed when it comes.
Yeah.
So that leaves the following 10. So of those, the bond, I mean, just going through them, I guess, the guidance, that's the sense of expenditure. So like I say, I'm hoping to get that done for June meeting, so that's fine. The agency payments we're hoping to get done by the end of June. The bonds is kind of an ongoing thing, so that depends on resourcing from an engineering point of view as well, because the majority of those bonds are old resource consent crossing bonds or entrance bonds. So there's a lot of, they have to go out and spec, make sure it's all right. And that's actually, particularly some of the older ones where the property's changed hands 2 or 3 times, it's trying to find the original person. So there's a bit of work in there. We probably won't have, we'll have done a lot of work on it, but I wouldn't say we've completely got rid of those bonds. The legislative matters, that's actually more probably at the management, the leadership team level for them to decide what to do around that. And actually, it's when you actually look at it, I didn't pick this up when the letter came, it's in there twice. They gave it 2 separate headings, which was also annoying. And we didn't pick it up when we actually reviewed the letter before they signed it off. So that's 2 of them then. The interest register, again, is, I guess, that's something Kaya's working on at the moment, or has been working on, getting that all together. So that's another couple of them. So I'm assuming the time frame is to try and get it done as soon as possible.
There's 2 through each year. There's 2 with that one. So I think Kaya will take the elected members one and make sure that that's updated. When we get a new people and capability manager to replace Kylie, then I'm going to task that to that person to get our staff interest register up to date.
Good. So what I think would be useful, Brendan, would be if we could, at the next meeting, Kaya, please get an update from Brendan as to how we're tracking relative to the 22.
Yep.
Because I think it's June is our next meeting, Kaya, is that right? So that'll give us a good sense as to whether we're tracking well for when the auditors turn up. The other question I had, and final question I had, Brendan, was in relation to the asset addition and disposal forms.
Yes.
Who is responsible for the organization's asset management plan?
So historically that's sat with Mark, I guess, overall, but he's had staff underneath him. Well, Roger back when they were last done. There's now a new manager, asset. That's the word. Yeah. Yeah. So she only started in February, I think. Yeah. So she's, that sits under her now. She's responsible. She's on the LTP project team that'll be working on getting those done with the assistance of the staff that is involved in those areas. And so she's working through that at the moment.
Okay. I'd be really keen, Tanya, if it's okay with you, at an appropriate time, whether it's June or wherever, to get a report on the state of the asset management plan. I come from a infrastructure governance background, and so understanding what assets we've got, the condition of those assets, our plans in relation to repairs and maintenance and renewals is fundamental to good quality budgeting and forecasting. So I'd be really keen to get a sense from the new manager who cold eyes, which is perfect. But we obviously want her to have an opportunity to get her feet under the desk. So if it's okay with you, I'd love to be able to schedule an agenda item for a presentation on the asset management plan at a time that you think is most suitable. Is that okay?
Yes.
Colleagues, happy with that? Excellent.
So I guess the question, sorry, I'm gonna ask Brendan. So the staff that are responsible for these items like this one, they know that this is in here?
Emma and I had discussions around this.
Because I think
actually
that's
before she even
fundamental.
started.
Yeah, great.
She was previously doing some work for
Yeah.
us, as a contractor, so she's done some work already on this for us, so.
Okay, thank you, Brendan. Everyone comfortable? So this report's been received. It's moved by Councillor Prendergast and seconded by His Worship, and that's now approved. Brendan, we're now on to the outstanding debtors report. Thanks for this report. Any material changes that you wanted to discuss?
No, nothing material.
I guess my key question for you, Brendan, on this.
Yep.
Not intended to be critical, but there's obviously quite a large number of 90-day and over debtors.
Yeah.
Where we're still negotiating payment arrangements.
Yes.
And I come from a background where if you didn't collect your debtors, you didn't get paid.
Yeah.
I realise that this is a slightly easier environment to operate in. But I did wonder whether, as a matter of policy, it made sense to look to negotiate terms for repayment in the 60 to 90-day window, rather than waiting until the 90-day window ticks over. Just from a cash flow perspective.
Yep.
I'd be interested in your thoughts and thoughts of colleagues if they think that's the same. Just that in my old organisation, when it got to 90 days, screaming started. And when it got to 120, people were yelling at you as to why you were running.
To you, really, Mr. Chair. Look, from coming in recently to this, I agree completely, and I just didn't know what was normal and what was acceptable. But the longer it goes, I think we can see the harder it would be to get that person into the state where they could enter into some sort of a supported agreement. And do we have support agencies? We've got the budgeting service, etc., that we can refer people to help them to get on board with payments. That right, makes we've got the, through the community house, we've got the budgeting services, etc., that can help people. Yes.
Probably goes back to that point, Kathy, it's the actual conversation is the most important thing. And if that's not happening, then we know that it's tough out there and people will push to the side and leave it till they're actually reminded. So that's back to Peter's point that if the conversations there earlier, gives greater consideration to it. And yes, this will be helpful.
Yes, it's not about creditor. But as Worship's just said, the earlier you have the conversation, the easier it is to work out a plan that will work for the organisation and work for the individual. Because the bottom line harshly is that there's a substantial cost that your ratepayers carry on behalf of a small number of people. So, Tanya, any objection from your perspective in terms of looking to have those conversations at an earlier stage between, say, 60 and 90 in terms of debt repayment arrangements rather than post 90?
No, nothing from me. Brendan might want to tell you what we do already, though, around kind of helping people. And it actually isn't that long ago before we had no one in this role. No one. So, we now have a dedicated person in this role. And before, it was like, finance team member got 5 minutes, or we might bring someone who and see if we can give them a jolly along. So I think, we've got a real focus in this area. The staff member, Teresa, does an amazing job. I've heard her on the phone with some of our trickiest, most difficult, people who owe us money, and she has managed to get them onto payment plans. But I'll leave it to Brendan. I've got no issue with it, but
Yeah.
Brendan will
I mean, I obviously have no issue as well. When you actually go back to the policy that was just adopted earlier in this meeting, it doesn't specify a date for payment arrangements, just that they will be at the discretion of council. So there's nothing even in the policy that you've just adopted to stop us from starting at that 60-day range. Even at 30 days for us who want it. I guess the other thing just around that large negotiating payment arrangement, I'll try to maintain privacy while at the same time trying to explain things. The bulk of that is actually one particular debtor undertaking a large project. There's been issues with the application forms that we're filling in, where they were putting the wrong legal name. So we've had issues that the parent company overseas would not pay the invoices because it's in the wrong name. We've had to redo invoices. Then there was a discussion that we wouldn't have to. So we had a discussion earlier last month about how that was all going to work. They actually came on site. We had that discussion. They're in the process of getting these all paid now without us having to do a whole heap of extra work to redo invoices. So most of that should be gone hopefully in the next month or so.
Okay, so I wonder whether not the next meeting, but the September. Would you mind giving us an update in September, just so that we can see whether that change in approach is bearing some fruit? And it sounds like you might have an easy win anyway, Brendan, if you're able to get that large sum out of the way.
Yes.
Okay, that's really helpful. Thank you. Okay, so I think unless colleagues have got any questions, we'll receive that report moved by Councillor Prendergast, seconded by Councillor Hughes. That's approved. Okay, turning now, thank you very much, Brendan. Turning now to key information services, risks and current strategic improvements. Billy, welcome. Thank you very much for your report. My name is Peter Stubbs. I'm the chair of the committee. Is there anything, Billy, that you wanted to add to your report before we move to colleagues for questions? Colleagues have any questions? Just while colleagues are thinking. Cybersecurity generally turns up in the top 5 risks year on year of board members in the world of governance. And I'm just really interested while my colleagues are thinking about whether they want to ask any questions. I'd be really interested in your view, Billy, as to the state of readiness of the organisation in terms particularly of cybersecurity risks.
I think if you'd asked me that question 12 months ago, I would have said poor. Now I think it's average. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad situation to be in, because being above average is often hard to achieve. And no disrespect to anybody in the room, but whilst we are all human, there is still a problem with cybersecurity. That's people are our biggest risk and continue to be. And that will never change, unfortunately. So, I'm going to say it's about average.
Okay, thank you. Colleagues, any questions?
It's not a question as such, but just a comment that it appears that it's ground made last week.
Significant changes have been made. Significant changes will continue to be made. But there is a point where we'll reach diminishing returns. Being 100% secure is impossible to achieve, very nearly impossible to achieve. And at some point, it becomes harder and harder for the user to actually do their job. So we need to make sure that we reach a point that is, shall we say, secure enough for the organisation, but not overly onerous to make it difficult for users to actually do their job. I think we're close to that point, actually, not too far away.
Sorry to interrupt you, Billy, but just one point I wanted to make, Tanya and Brendan, in relation to the legislative compliance issue from the previous conversation, and I meant to make this point before. Waikato District has just implemented a software solution called Comply With. And if you thought that might be of value, Brendan, it might be worthwhile you having a conversation with Alison Diaz, who's, I think, the CFO at Waikato District. I think I'm having a briefing on how it works on Monday, but it might be worthwhile the conversation, because if there's a software solution that can help, which can lever off bodies and use a technical solution instead, that might be worth considering. Anyway,
I just, sorry to interrupt, but I think regional council, which is where I was from, had used Comply With as well. Sounds familiar anyway. Cool.
Through you, Chair, I thought that we'd been offered an opportunity to be involved in it, but you still need a warm body who's kind of across, like to be able to use it. And I think that was the manager business improvement kind of role we had in mind would help us stay across that sort of thing, but I could be wrong, so it's worth looking into to see.
Our legal team at the regional
Yeah,
council,
yeah.
were the overseers, if you like.
And we don't have a legal team.
No,
no. Point taken, but I just thought it was at least worth looking at. Billy, one of the things that I think many New Zealanders are now alive to, which are the implications of climate change on weather. And when you think about it in the context of business continuity planning, and you think about what happened to Gisborne, where basically they were effectively cut off. One of the things that you note in your report, page para 4.3, is around the possibility of the use of Starlink as being under consideration. Now, whether it's Starlink or whether it's someone else, what level of urgency do you attach to landing a view on that? Because I recognise that this district is not Gisborne, but I don't have a sense as to whether it has greater or lesser risks from a climate perspective. But I am interested in your comment about connectivity redundancies still be worked through. I'm interested in your comment on that.
in the past, I would have to go back to the regional council again. As you can imagine, with an office right in the centre of town, we have multiple options for having some sort of connectivity into the office. 2 different suppliers with 2 different fibres coming from 2 different directions, which essentially culminated in our server room. So the odds of being completely disconnected in that building were fairly low. And of course, we had the advantage of having a civil defence office immediately across the road if there was a problem with our main office. We don't have any of those facilities here. The issue we have here is that really there's only one supplier, Chorus, and one fibre going through town. So having a viable alternative is not easily met by using fibre. And the options that are open to us are basically having a 5G connection or using something like Starlink, which I have some experience with now because that's what I've had to put in at home in order to get a decent broadband connection. Either would work reasonably well. Neither are perfect in my opinion, but you know, as an option, those are the sorts of things that are open to us. And in terms of timing, I would kind of hope to resolve this sometime in this calendar year. I don't think it's immediately urgent to us, but it's something that does need to be considered.
Colleagues, any thoughts on that? I just wonder whether it might be useful kind of to diarise the first meeting of 2024. Maybe we can ask Billy to give us a heads up on planning for that contingency. Because I think we certainly know from reports that the former mayor of Gisborne was tearing her hair out because of lack of connectivity. And given the importance of the council in the context of the lives of the ratepayers, not being able to communicate with citizenry, I would have thought was a major.
Yeah.
Okay.
Through the chair, if I do have just one question for clarification. Like with sample compliance, you see we've gone from a 35% compliance up to 43, with eligible being 55. Is that there for all the bullet points we're talking about in terms of how we're performing on those?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Unfortunately, I've just had an email this morning saying that that particular tool is being reconfigured. And in doing so, all of our marks, not just Ōtorohanga, but everyone is going to go down by about 25%. Because there are some new controls being added. So we have to basically go through it again and redo a lot of it. But I don't, like I said in the report, I don't see, what did I say? It was 44%. I don't see that as necessarily a bad thing at this stage. Yeah, when you consider it as a benchmark, we're starting to work up towards the average, which is pretty good.
So the reason our compliance level is so low is for late adopters of the program. Is that?
Sorry,
the reason why our score is somewhat lower than what the average is because we're late adopters.
yes,
Yeah. Okay.
yeah.
Forgive me, Billy, probably the only person in the room who doesn't know what it means. What is SAM?
Oh, Sam's actually the name of the cat that the people who wrote the program put together. But I wish I could remember what the actual acronym stands for that they've made it for. But
Perhaps if you just describe the program.
yeah. Oh, sorry, the program. SAM for compliance is there are literally hundreds of controls that can be marked in cybersecurity that you can mark yourself against.
Right.
SAM for compliance is a New Zealand product that has been developed by actually a world-renowned cybersecurity expert who actually happens to live in the Hawke's Bay, speaking of that. And they have taken the most relevant controls relevant to local government and put them into an assessment tool called SAM for compliance. It's a self-assessment tool, but I'm going to say probably 30 or 40 New Zealand local government organisations are now subscribed to it. So there is a reasonable benchmark and a reasonable, knowledge base of information in there now. Whilst it's a self-assessment tool, in order to do a reasonable audit, most councils would get the author of that tool in to do an audit and help you through that, at least for the very, very first time, to set your own benchmark.
Okay,
but it's considered to be a bit of a New Zealand standard, I suppose, for measuring cybersecurity awareness and readiness.
Okay, thank you. That's most helpful. I mean, finally, from my perspective, I beg your pardon, Councillor.
Thank you, through Chair. Hi, Billy. Just going back to the Starlink contingency. I don't know a lot about this Starlink, but you've obviously just got one in, so you get a little more idea. But those receiver panels, so for an organisation like this, as a backup contingency, would we need a number of those for saying, say, like telemetry at water treatment stations and stuff like this? Is that so? They'd need to be on site as a backup, like you'd have a backup generator for power loss and this sort of thing. Is that how it works?
I think there are a couple of options there. One is that we could have one on the roof of this building, and one would probably be enough in an emergency situation. I know from my own experience at home just how much bandwidth I can get through it at any one time, and it's pretty reasonable. But there is an argument that having, say, a spare of those in a cupboard somewhere wouldn't be out of the bounds of possibility either. The purchase cost of those has changed quite significantly over the last 6 months since I bought my own, as it happens.
Yes, true.
And the monthly cost of running it or not running it isn't over the top. It's about $160 per month. So having one in a cupboard is not the end of the world.
I see they were the go-to thing for as Peter pointed out at the, after Cyclone Gabriel, I mean, that's the only thing that would really work. So, you know, as you say, it's probably a worthwhile investment to have it, I would think, as a contingency for fibre breakage or anything like that, because that could happen at any time. You just need a digger to cut a cable and you're done, aren't you, really? So
Yeah, and I know from experience again that setup is about 15 minutes. You literally can throw it on the ground and it'll fly the satellite and start up.
yeah, my son just recently, well, they've got one too, but he's in the same position as you. He paid $1,000 for the thing, and they've come down significantly since then. So yeah, but it's certainly it's not going to be an expensive thing to uptake, is it?
My understanding, Billy, is that there's also Starlink's not the only option. There are other New Zealand options as well.
5G would be one option to consider as well. I don't think, I might be wrong, but I don't think Spark have it here yet, but I believe Vodafone do. One in New Zealand.
Lightwire may offer a solution, which is a white comfortable based.
Sorry, what was
Lightwire?
potentially, yes. I don't know what they have locally here. I did investigate them. Again, I'm talking from personal experience here. I did investigate them at one stage and the signal sort of ran out close to where I live, but that's a possibility. There's also a company in Te Kuiti called Wireless Dynamics, I think it is, that might offer something like that.
Okay. Look, at the end of the day, we'll leave it in your hands. So we'll look forward to hearing from you in the first session of 2024 on that BCP issue. Then finally, you've attached some drafts of policies. I assume they were simply there for information, and that at some point you'll be bringing them either to this committee or to the full council for approval. So I just wanted to signal the fact that I didn't read them because they were asked for approval. So
No, the policies after all.
okay. Anyone else? All right, we'll take that report as having been received, moved by His Worship and seconded by Councillor Prendergast. Thank you very much, Billy.
No problem. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Okay, I think we're now at a point where we move to exclude the public for the reasons set out in the resolution which members have. That will be moved by me and seconded by His Worship. Not comfortable? Thank you, Dave. Just wait until